Okay, so we've got plenty of new additions to some of our sessions within ROM Programming, as you guys know. The sessions that were formerly known as Olympic lifting are now called power, because power is basically our ability to move fast as well as moving strong. So there is an equation for it, which we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about, but basically force, we can just call that how much weight you're lifting for all intents and purposes, how far you're moving that weight, and how quickly you do it. And how quickly is the key element here. This is not about a slow grinding deadlift, but a very fast explosive movement. Now, there are a lot of benefits for this. First, the performance benefits. So if you're an athlete, obviously if you can move faster, move more powerfully, it's of benefit. If you're a boxer, if you're really strong but you punch very slowly, it's not super effective. If you're a high jumper, you can have a really big squat, but if you can't jump explosively with speed, it's not very effective. So from an athletic point of view, it's pretty obvious what all the benefits are. But from a health point of view, which of course is what we are as if not more concerned with, there have been really good correlations found between how powerful you are, that is how fast you can move, that's also strong, and things like fall prevention. So if you think about it, if you're walking, you're in your 80s, you're walking and you trip on something, it doesn't matter how strong you are as to whether or not you catch yourself, it's about you quickly moving that foot in position, speed as well as strength there. So there's actually a stronger correlation with long-term health with power than there is with strength. So it's not just good to be a real strong dude, you need to be able to move quickly as well. So a lot of performance and health benefits. A couple of key elements that you guys will see popping up in the programming now, and key things that you should understand when we talk about why we are doing these sessions. Because some of these power sessions, they're not going to leave you feeling out of breath, they're not going to feel your muscles sore, you aren't going to be exhausted in a puddle of sweat at the end, but that doesn't mean it's not effective. So this idea that a lot of people have that a session must be hard, and the harder a session, the more benefit, is absolutely not true. Nowhere more so than with these power sessions. So a couple of key elements that I'd like you guys to understand, because I want you guys to know why we're doing things as we are, not just that do this because my personal coach says so. First is called a stretch, shorten cycle. Now, if you take an elastic band, you pull that elastic band back, you hold it for a couple of seconds, and then you let it go, it's going to go about 4 meters. If you pull it back and let it go straight away, it's going to go about 6, because there's a stored energy inside that band that's going to dissipate if you hold it there. The same thing in your muscles, even more so, particularly in our tendons. So there's something called the stretch, shorten cycle. And that tells you that when you stretch a muscle and then when you fire it and contract it straight away, it generates more power than if you don't do that quick. Stretch, shorten. Okay, so it's a really good way to generate power. And we'll go through some practical examples today of how to do that. Those of you who are watching this on video, what I'll do is I'll post some links below in comments so you guys can see as well. Those of you who are here live can see some videos of how to do some of these movements that we're going to be practicing today. A second key element or tenet of this is the speed and acceleration continue beyond the end of range. So everyone just imagine you're doing a really heavy back squat. Once you get through that hard point in the middle, it's then pretty easy. Yeah, it's that point where you know, yep, it's easy from here on out, and we start to slow down. And of course, when we slow down, we're no longer using speed, therefore we're no longer using power because we're not moving quickly. So a powerful back squat would be one where you continue to accelerate, even at the very end, to the point where you're actually jumping. So there's no slowly decelerating at the top. Speed continues until the end of range and beyond, like throwing a ball, as opposed to just a bench press where you slow down at the end. So that's something you'll see quite a lot in these sessions. Something called PAP. This is post-activation potentiation, which is just a fancy way of saying that if you want to do a really high jump squat, you have to do a really heavy squat first. So you unload a bar, you do a really heavy back squat or 2 reps, so it's like 85% of your max, really heavy. You then rack it, you will then be able to jump higher than you could if you hadn't just have done those 2 heavy back squats. Because what we're basically doing is we're turning up the volume on all the muscles and on all the nerves that do that jumping movement. Does that make sense? So if you want to do something like a broad jump, I'm trying to jump as far that way horizontally as I can. If you think of a broad jump like this, that looks a lot like the setup position for a deadlift. So if you were to do 2 really heavy deadlifts and then turn around, you would be able to jump further than if you hadn't just done those deadlifts. So a lot of the time in these sessions that we have in ROM programming, in our new sessions, you will see a very heavy movement immediately into a very, very light or unweighted movement that's going to really build a lot of power and speed. When we're programming this, again, this isn't about working yourself into the ground. It's not work hard to get results, it's work fast to get results. So you'll see very short sets. You're talking 6 reps of a jump, which is going to be over in 3 or 4 seconds. Yeah? You'll see extremely long rests. So you'll be resting for 10 times as long as you're working for. So you may only be working for that 5 seconds, and you're then going to be resting for a couple of minutes or more after that. And you're not going to see a lot of sets of this. This is not about fatiguing you. This is about training your nervous system as much as it is training your muscles. All that make sense? All right, so this curve here is called the force velocity curve, and it looks really fancy and it looks like there's a lot of science and physics going on here, but you guys will inherently understand a lot of this already, but I'd like to explain how this works. Force, let's just call it how much weight you're lifting, because it's a simple way to understand it. Velocity, which of course is how fast you're moving. We can call that your speed. And we have this curve because, as you guys can probably work out, if we have a whole heap of force, so what would be your strongest move, and you can lift more than any other exercise? Something like a deadlift, yeah? A max deadlift, the heavier you get, the slower you get, yeah? When it's light, you can move really quickly. As it gets heavier, you start to slow down. So if you're going for a max deadlift, there's going to be loads of force, but there's going to be very little velocity. How about the fastest movement you can do? Maybe like a 20-meter sprint. The absolute fastest thing you can possibly do. Heaps of velocity, it's really fast, but the force is very low because there's no added weight there. Does that make sense? So those are the two extremes. So we actually have this curve that talks about our relationship between force and velocity, because you guys can see how we want to find a middle ground. We want to add as much weight as we can, but not to the point where we start to lose speed. Yeah, that makes sense? 5 different points on this curve. The first is called max strength. We do a lot of work on max strength. That's your heavy deadlifts, your bench press, your squats, your powerlifting basically. All right? Those slow sort of grinding movements. The second point, where we start to get a little lighter, a little bit less force, but a little faster, and that's your Olympic weightlifting. Snatches, clean and jerks, those sort of things. And again, we do a fair bit of this stuff. These 3 areas are areas that I feel we've been neglecting in our power training. And this is why we've changed the name of the power exercises, the Olympic lifting sessions, to power, because we're now going to be incorporating these 3 sections. So let me talk you through how these work. The first is peak power, and that is where we're in that beautiful Goldilocks area where it's not super, super heavy but slow. It's not super, super fast but light. It's right in the middle where it is both heavy-ish and fast-ish, where power is maximized. So again, this equation here, it's optimized to improve your power as much as possible. That includes things like throws, like a med ball throw or a dead ball throw, weighted jumps, so you're doing jumps but with a little bit of weight added to your body, maybe a barbell or dumbbells or a vest, and things like weighted sprints. So if you are pushing a prowler or dragging a sled, max effort, super, super fast, moderate weight for less than 10 seconds, 5 or 10 seconds, maybe 10 meters of sprint. That's your peak power. As we move further along this, we get faster and a little lighter. We have what's called speed strength. And this is where we do jumps, but there's no stretch, shorten cycle. So you guys will remember that stretch, shorten cycle is when you pull the elastic band back and let it go straight away, yeah? As opposed to pulling it back, holding, then letting it go. Speed strength is when you pull it back, hold it, and then let it go. So it's going to be like me doing a max height jump where I go here, I wind up, and I jump. It's not a bounce. There's no elastic bounce where you're loading the muscles. That's your speed strength. And finally, max velocity. Like I talked about before, it's like a flat out 20-meter sprint with no added weight, or jumps where there is a stretch, shorten cycle. So some sort of bounce where you jump, you load up the muscles, and then you rebound and explosively jump again. What happens when we train any one of these areas is that area improves and the others start to fall away a little bit. So if you have someone who's just super, super strong, super muscly, they can deadlift the world, they're up here and they train only this area, although they're getting stronger, all of this stuff will be jeopardized. The strength, this point here, is going to move further along because they're getting stronger and they can start to get faster at that weight as they get stronger, but all of this stuff is going to fall back this way. Same thing, if you've got someone who's a sprinter and they run, that's what they do, they just do 100-meter sprints, their velocity is going to improve here. They're going to start to be able to move faster. However, everything else is going to be jeopardized. So you can see what we're trying to do, because we're not trying to create the world's best powerlifter or the world's best sprinter. We're trying to create someone who's equally proficient at both, who's both strong and fast. We want to train all of these. The aim of the new sessions and all the power sessions that we've got in your ROM programming is to basically move the curve that way. So the entire curve is moving in that direction.